Subscribe if you hate Karens, and comment what country you're watching this from. The setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates as I finally turned my cruiser onto my street. My bones ached, a familiar ache that came with the territory of being the county sheriff. Today had been one of those days where justice felt more like a stubborn weed than a blooming rose. A domestic dispute turned violent, a complicated embezzlement case, and a near miss with a drunk driver. The list seemed endless. All I wanted was to get home, fire up the grill, maybe catch the end of the ball game with my kids, and just breathe. Willow Creek wasn't exactly my style. It was all perfectly trimmed hedges and matching mailboxes, a picture of suburban tranquility. When my wife, Sarah, had first suggested moving here a few years back, I'd hesitated. It felt sterile. I grew up on a farm, dirt under my fingernails. But Sarah had her heart set on it for the kids, for the excellent schools, and the perceived safety. And honestly, after years of cramped apartment living, I couldn't deny the appeal of a spacious backyard and a garage big enough to actually fit a car. As I neared my driveway, something caught my eye. A figure was hovering near my mailbox, partially obscured by the overgrown rose bushes that Sarah swore she'd get around to pruning. It was Karen Miller, my neighbor from across the street. Karen, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, overly tanned skin, and a perpetual expression of disapproval etched on her face. Karen had made it clear from day one that she didn't approve of me or my family being in Willow Creek. Subtle digs about my inappropriate truck, complaints about the kids playing too loudly in the backyard, and pointed stares whenever I was working on the lawn. It was a constant, low-level hum of negativity. I chalked it up to good old-fashioned prejudice, the kind that simmers beneath the surface in places like this. I'd learned to ignore it, to rise above it, but it still stung. As I got closer, I could see her more clearly. She was fiddling with something, her slender fingers tucked inside my mailbox. My stomach clenched. What was she doing? My foot instinctively pressed down on the accelerator. I wasn't imagining things. She was taking something out of my mailbox. My mail. Anger, hot and sharp, flared within me. After the day I'd had, this was the last thing I needed. This wasn't just about mail. This was about her blatant disregard for the law, her audacity, her unwavering belief that she was somehow better than me. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching slightly as I pulled into my driveway. I cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the pounding of my heart. It was time to address this head-on. I hoped she had a good explanation, though I doubted it. My long day of justice was apparently not over yet. It was just getting a little too personal. I got out of the car, the weight of my badge a tangible presence against my chest. I walked purposefully towards Karen, my expression carefully neutral. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Is there a reason you're taking mail out of my mailbox?" She visibly startled, her already pale face flushing an unbecoming shade of pink. She clutched the mail tighter to her chest, as if afraid I would snatch it away. "James," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I was just making sure it wasn't anything important. Sometimes the mailman gets things mixed up, you know." "Mixed up?" I raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "My name is clearly printed on that mailbox, and on the mail, I presume." She avoided my gaze, her eyes darting nervously around. "Well, yes, but this neighborhood has certain standards, James, and frankly, I doubt you even belong here. This mail is probably for the previous owners, or maybe it's some kind of scam." The words hung in the air, thick with malice. "That's nonsense, Karen, and you know it." My patience was wearing thin. "That mail is addressed to me, and you know it. Now, I'm going to ask you nicely, give me back my mail. I'm not giving you anything," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "You don't belong here. You're bringing down the property values. You and your noisy children. This mail is probably something illegal anyway. I'm doing everyone a favor." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The blatant prejudice, the outright theft, the sheer audacity of it all. "Karen, you're committing a federal crime. Mail theft is a serious offense. Just give me the mail back, and we can forget this ever happened." "Forget it? I wouldn't dream of it." She puffed out her chest, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "This is a matter of principle. I'm not going to let you get away with whatever you're up to. I'm calling the police." She pulled out her phone, her fingers stabbing at the screen. "Yes, hello, 911. I'm at Willow Creek Estates. I need to report a trespasser and a possible mail thief. He's harassing me, and he's just not who he says he is." I sighed. This was escalating quickly and unnecessarily. I considered just taking the mail from her, but I knew that would only fuel her narrative, give her more ammunition to use against me. I decided to wait, let the authorities sort it out. But I also knew that this situation was far from over. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mirror the ugliness unfolding in my front yard. The peace I had so desperately craved after a long day was now shattered, replaced by a simmering anger and a deep sense of frustration. Her words about not belonging here stung me, and she said it with so much conviction that it hurt. I was not just a county sheriff. I was also a black man in a community that had some problems beneath the perfect surface. The wail of sirens cut through the quiet evening air, growing louder as the patrol car approached. A familiar face, Officer Miller, no relation to Karen, thankfully, stepped out of the vehicle, followed by a younger, less experienced officer. Miller, a seasoned veteran of the force, knew me well. We'd worked together on several cases, and he knew my reputation, both as a law enforcement officer and as a member of the community. "James?" Miller said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Everything all right here?" "Not really, Tom," I replied, gesturing towards Karen, who was still clutching the mail to her chest like a prized possession. "Karen here seems to think she's entitled to my mail." Miller's eyebrows shot up. He looked from me to Karen, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Karen? What's going on?" "This man," she said, pointing a trembling finger at me, "is a fraud. He's not who he says he is. He's stealing mail, harassing me, and probably involved in all sorts of illegal activities. I saw him." Miller sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. He'd dealt with Karen before. She was known for her eccentricities, her overzealousness, and her tendency to exaggerate. "Karen, this is James Butler. He's the county sheriff." The color drained from Karen's face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She stared at me, her eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and horror. The younger officer looked equally stunned, his jaw practically hitting the ground. "Sheriff Butler?" Miller continued, turning back to me. "Can you explain what's happening here?" I calmly recounted the events of the past few minutes, from discovering Karen at my mailbox to her accusations and refusal to return the mail. "I believe she's under the mistaken impression that I don't belong in this neighborhood, and that she's somehow justified in taking my mail," I concluded. Miller turned to Karen, his voice firm. "Karen, You need to give Sheriff Butler his mail back. Now, mail theft is a serious crime, and I'm sure you don't want to get into any trouble." Karen remained frozen, her eyes still fixed on me. The reality of the situation seemed to be finally sinking in. She had called the police on the county sheriff, accusing him of being a criminal, while simultaneously committing a federal crime herself. The irony was almost comical, if it wasn't so infuriating. I started to feel bad for her, even after all her bigotry and hatred. She was a woman trapped in her hatred and prejudice, and that was sad. Karen opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She looked from me to Officer Miller, then to the younger officer, her eyes pleading for understanding. But the officers were just waiting for her to comply, the weight of the law hanging heavy in the air. "Karen," Officer Miller repeated, his voice losing its patience, "give him back the mail." Finally, with a trembling hand, she extended the mail towards me. I took it, my fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was cold and clammy. She was clearly terrified. "Thank you," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I quickly glanced through the mail. Bills, junk mail, and a letter from my mother. Nothing earth-shattering, but it was my mail, and she had no right to take it. "Sheriff Butler," Officer Miller said, "do you want to press charges?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see her held accountable for her actions, to teach her a lesson about respect and the rule of law. But another part of me felt a twinge of pity. She was clearly mortified, and I didn't want to ruin her life over a few pieces of mail, even though she had aimed to ruin mine for years. "I'm willing to let it go," I said, "if she promises to never do anything like this again, and if she understands the seriousness of what she did." Officer Miller nodded. "Karen, do you understand?" Karen nodded weakly, her eyes still fixed on the ground. "Yes," she whispered, "I understand." "And do you promise to never do anything like this again?" Miller pressed. "Yes," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "I promise." "All right," Miller said, turning back to me. "I think that's all we can do here, Sheriff. If you have any more problems, just give us a call." "Thanks, Tom," I said. "I appreciate it." As the officers turned to leave, I remembered something. "Wait," I said. "There's one more thing." I walked over to my garage and rummaged through a box until I found what I was looking for: the security camera footage from my doorbell camera. I'd installed it a few months ago, mostly to keep an eye on deliveries when we're not around. But now it had captured Karen's little escapade in perfect detail. I showed the footage to Officer Miller. He watched, his expression growing increasingly grim. The video clearly showed Karen approaching my mailbox, opening it, and removing the mail. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. "Well, Karen," Miller said, turning back to her, "it looks like you weren't just making sure things weren't mixed up. You were stealing mail, and this evidence is pretty clear." Karen's face crumpled. She started to cry, her shoulders shaking. I don't know what to say," she sobbed. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't doing anything illegal." "That's not for you to decide, Karen," Miller said, his voice stern. "That's what we're here for. And right now, you're the one who's breaking the law." The situation had officially escalated. The pity I felt for Karen evaporated, replaced by a cold sense of justice. She had been given a chance to walk away, to admit her mistake and apologize. But she had doubled down, clinging to her prejudice and her misguided belief that she was above the law. "I'm going to have to arrest you, Karen," Officer Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You have the right to remain silent." As Miller recited the Miranda rights, Karen's sobs intensified. The younger officer stepped forward to handcuff her. The reality of the situation seemed to finally hit her with full force. She was going to jail. "No, please," she wailed. "Don't do this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm." "It's too late for that, Karen," Miller said, his expression unchanged. "You should have thought about that before you stole that mail." As the officers led Karen towards the patrol car, she suddenly broke free, still clutching a few pieces of the mail that hadn't fallen out of her grasp. She took off running, her high heels clicking frantically on the pavement. The younger officer gave chase, quickly gaining ground. Karen, encumbered by her heels and her panic, tripped and fell, sprawling face first onto the lawn. The remaining mail scattered around her like fallen leaves. The officer quickly apprehended her, securing the handcuffs around her wrists. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in the grass. The scene was almost pathetic, a far cry from the picture of suburban perfection she so desperately tried to project. As the police car pulled away, sirens blaring, I noticed a figure standing across the street, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. It was Mrs. Henderson, our other neighbor, known for her sharp eyes and her even sharper tongue. She had her phone out, pointed directly at the scene. My heart sank. Of course, this was going to be all over social media in a matter of minutes. The Karen stereotype was already rampant online, and this was the perfect fuel for the fire. I could picture the headlines now. "Racist neighbor calls police on black sheriff for stealing mail, ends up arrested instead." I sighed. There was nothing I could do to stop it. The incident had already unfolded, and the damage was done. All I could do was brace myself for the fallout. This little drama in Willow Creek was about to go viral. What made it worse was that it was all because of her racial prejudice against me. The next morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Texts, calls, and emails flooded my inbox. The video of Karen's arrest was everywhere, shared and re-shared across every social media platform. The headlines were even worse than I had imagined. "Karen gets schooled by black sheriff after attempting mail theft," screamed one. "Racist neighbor's epic fail goes viral," blared another. Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, or curse her for the drama, had captured the entire incident, from Karen's initial confrontation to her ungraceful fall and subsequent arrest. The video was a hit, a perfect storm of schadenfreude and social commentary. People were outraged by Karen's racism, amused by her incompetence, and strangely fascinated by the fact that I, the target of her prejudice, was also the county sheriff. The media frenzy was relentless. News crews descended on Willow Creek, cameras flashing, reporters sticking microphones in our faces. Sarah and the kids were understandably overwhelmed. I tried to shield them as much as possible, but it was impossible to escape the spotlight. Karen, meanwhile, had become a pariah. Her picture was plastered all over the internet, accompanied by hateful comments and mocking memes. She lost her job, her friends shunned her, and her reputation was irreparably damaged. She was the poster child for entitled racism, the embodiment of everything that was wrong with suburban privilege. A few days later, I received a call from Karen's lawyer. He was desperate to negotiate a settlement, to somehow mitigate the damage to her reputation and her future. He offered a public apology, a hefty donation to a charity of my choice, and a promise to undergo sensitivity training. I was hesitant. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let her suffer the consequences of her actions. But ultimately, I decided that forgiveness was the right path. I didn't want to hold on to the anger and resentment. to let her negativity poison my own life, so I agreed to the terms. A few days later, Karen stood before a throng of reporters, her face pale and drawn, and read a prepared statement. She apologized to me, to my family, and to the community for her actions. She acknowledged that her behavior was wrong, that her prejudice was unacceptable, and that she would dedicate herself to becoming a better person. The apology felt hollow, forced, born more out of desperation than genuine remorse, but I accepted it nonetheless. The media frenzy eventually died down, the news cycle moving on to the next outrage. Willow Creek slowly returned to normal, though the memory of Karen's viral infamy lingered in the air. Life went on. I was still the county sheriff, still a black man living in a predominantly white neighborhood. But something had shifted. The incident had exposed the undercurrent of prejudice that had always been present, forcing the community to confront its own biases. It also made me realize how important it was to stand up for what's right, to challenge injustice wherever I found it, even when it came from my own backyard. And maybe, just maybe, it planted a seed of change in Karen's heart, a tiny spark of understanding that could eventually blossom into something resembling empathy. It was a long shot, but I had to hope, because after all, I was still a sheriff, and it was my job to believe in the possibility of redemption even for the most unlikely of candidates.